Have you ever had anyone pass away in your life, like a family member or a close friend? If so, you know how devastating it is, and it really takes your world and throws it into chaos. Well, this story is about Joe and how death affected his life. Joe grew up in the Midwest, and his life was pretty ordinary. All but 3 weeks out of the year when his father would plan a family adventure. Sometimes they would go spelunking in the Canadian Rockies or on a road trip in the West Coast. Joe loved these trips, and he really grew closer to his dad during these weeks. They really bonded over travel. After Joe turned 21, his father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Joe was devastated. And as his father, his health declined and he withered and died, Joe watched his hero take his last breath. The following months were the worst for Joe. He quit his job, dropped out of school, and threw himself into his projects. Till one day he found an article about a man who rode his bicycle around the world, and it gave him hope. So he instantly started researching and acquiring gear. Him and his dad always wanted to go to Ireland together, so that was an obvious destination. Joe bought a one-way ticket, and 3 planes later in 18 hours, he arrived in Ireland. Once he stepped out of the airport, he was shocked. Everyone was driving on the wrong side of the road. He had no idea. He had never left the continent before, had never really traveled. He had no plans. He didn't even know where he was going to stay that night. But his dad always told him to challenge himself. And what more of a challenge than to ride across Ireland on a bicycle? So Joe jumped on his bike and started pedaling. Click, click, click. He really needed to get that fixed. A few days later, people would stop him and ask him, "Where are you heading?" After he would tell them, they would laugh, "Ha, ha, ha, you're never going to make it." So he was determined. He jumped back on his bike, click, 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 through the cold, through the rain. He just kept pedaling, click, 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 till one day he made it to the beach. The ocean was right in front of him. He had never seen it before and looked very different than he expected. There were more pebbles than there were sand. There was more seaweed than sandcastles. And he was the only one there. So in an act of defiance, he decided to set up his camp right there, right on the beach. It was his. So he set up his tent, blew up his mattress, and fluffed his sleeping bag. He plopped all of his gear outside of his tent and went exploring for a few hours. Later that evening, he returned back to where he thought was his camp, and somehow the landscape had changed. The beach had disappeared, and the ocean was now the shoreline. Am I in the right place? He pondered. And then in the distance, he saw it. There was his pack, bouncing, bobbing in the ocean. And with every wave, it got thrashed against the rocks. He now realized that the ocean was upon him, and his tent was far underwater. His trip had ended just as it had begun, and he had no idea what to do. He gathered what little strength he had and fished his pack out of the ocean, jumped back on his bike, back to town, click, 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 checked into a hostel to dry off. Next morning, he went back on his bike, back to the scene of the crime, click, 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 to look for remnants of his gear. He walked along the seashore back to his campground. And to his astonishment, the tent was still there, staked down to the ground, perfectly as he had left it. His trip was saved. He quickly scooped up all of his gear, put it back on his bike, and pedaled away, click, click, click. Next day, he was re-inspired, reinvigorated. His trip was back on, and he wondered if his dad had something to do with that outcome. His trip became a trip about self-exploration and growth. He met many people and overcame many challenges. His dad had given him that adventure, and Joe was eternally grateful. So months turned into years, and Joe continued, click, 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 around the world. Thank you.